Sometimes work feels like it's set to the rhythm of an hourglass. The clock is ticking, the pressure is on, industry, of course, keeps spinning, and we're expected to keep up. But have you ever felt like your work became passive, like you're just maintaining the machine instead of fighting for what's right? In this conversation, Kirk and I talk about the tension between Chronos time, the ticking clock, and the Kairos time, the right moment. The moment where you step up, create solutions, and hit the game winning shot. What I love too is Kirk has spent nearly 37 years working with ESPN, and he shares a great story about my alma mater, University of Connecticut. But what truly stands out is something simple. He keeps a note that reminds him every day trust yourself. Let's roll right in. All right, welcome to the Work Sucks, but I Like It podcast. Today we have Kirk McCarley. He has 35 years of experience as a human resource executive, as a production assistant for both college football and basketball for ESPN, which is really cool. He's the author of the book Thoughts for My Kids and Other People's Kids. He's been married for 44 years, has 2 kids, and now 7 grandkids. Kirk's mission is to plant seeds of confidence as the seed sower coach. Kirk, welcome to the show.
Tony, my pleasure to be with you.
Awesome. Kirk, so first question out of the gate, how do you define work today? How do you define it?
We often, in my mind, set boundaries between work and life, and I find that they blend together. When I'm doing life, I'm often thinking about work, a project that's upcoming, a difficult situation that I have to cope with. And when I'm doing work, I'm thinking about sick kids at home, or a dinner that I've got to meet my wife for, or a weekend activity that's upcoming. So they tend to, in my mind, Tony, homogenize. And now that I'm doing several different gigs, besides the 8 to 5, so to speak, it becomes even more so blended together, if you will.
So, just for you listeners, Kirk and I met on Pod Match, and we were kind of talking before this episode. So, I love how he threw in homogenized. He's got some background in metallurgy. So, if you hear some sort of, science nerd kind of phrases, that's where it's coming from. But I love that, Kirk. So, you already kind of jumped into this, and I love it. So, let's kind of build on this. So, work and life balance, you kind of talked about it. Is it the right equation we should be solving? You're saying that they sort of blend. Why does culture focus on work and life being separate?
We're on clocks. We have 168 hours in a week, 24 in a day, 7 days in a week. And psychologically, we tend to go according to the hourglass. In other words, I'm going to do work activities between 8 and 5. And if I go beyond that, sometimes I feel like that's a violation of my territory, that I'm into work now and I get pissed off at work because this is keeping me from activities I'd rather be doing. Um, that's Chronos time. I tend to seek Kairos time, which is those instantaneous moments that are so rewarding. It's what I love about my coaching now. When I encounter someone that has a breakthrough, an aha moment, time seems to stand still. It's like coming up with a solution to a problem. It's falling in love. It's getting the game-winning hit. That's what we all strive for. And in my coaching, my encouragement to clients, seek those opportunities and work becomes fun.
So one of the things that we talk about on the show is that success is not a matter of good luck, it's good skills. So you mentioned this idea of importance of planting seeds of confidence. Can you explain to the audience here how we develop the skill of confidence in our work that we do?
We start by believing in ourselves.
Mm.
I've got a sticky note that I look at daily when I have those moments of self-doubt that kicks in. It says trust yourself. Why do you trust yourself? Before I went into my coaching profession and took a risk doing that, I left the safety of the 40-hour a week work environment. I had somebody that said something very profound to me. He was a fellow coach, and he said, "You're educated. You've had years of experience in what you've done. You've been successful in that. You're not going to end up on the streets, homeless, hungry, because you're going to have the wherewithal to think
Mm.
through that. And you've solved problems for many, many years." That was very encouraging to me, and it still is in those moments when the self doubt, the imposter syndrome seems to kick in just a little bit. And I remind myself of the road that I've been on that gets me here. And I think for anyone else who feels stuck or unworthy, reflect back on what you've done, particularly professionals, and what has taken you to where you are right now. And I think that goes a long way to overcoming those self doubts that can sometimes bite us if we let them.
So I'm always curious, Kirk, and I'm really excited to hear kind of your response with this, especially with you being in HR for these 35 plus years, of that side of your work that you do. What sucked about corporate, as we'll kind of label it? Why did you feel this frustration to want to leave corporate and start your own coaching business? What sucked about it?
Well, there's a laundry list of stories that can go with that. I want to say, first of all, it was a pretty good career. I give it a B plus, A minus. I don't have any regrets, and it built the foundation for where I am now. I view those 30, 35 years as almost training to get me prepared for what it is that I really enjoy. But we talked a little bit before we went live, the politics of things and living up to the expectations, the culture of the organization, the inhibitions that would be created that would prohibit me from being my true self and find my full potential, which I'm still seeking, but I'm having a much better opportunity to do that now. Uh, the expectations that go with that. I tended to be a little bit of an out of the box thinker. I know that's kind of a trite saying to some degree, but people would label me, "There's our weird HR director. What are you thinking about this time?" And I don't really think that's going to work here. And there were times I would accept that, other times I would fight it a little bit. And the last 2 years that I experienced in my corporate environment, quite frankly, was hell because of some things I had been asked to do, which my values just wouldn't allow me to do that.
So that's an interesting thing, Kirk, right? So one of the things I loved studying from Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, so the father of flow, he called this thing called the paradox of work. Basically, in essence, people find these flow states at work when asked where they'd rather be anywhere but work. And he kind of attributed that to this mismatch of values. Can you speak about what you sort of saw in this aha moment, if you will, of the value shift? Like, what was that moment where you're like, okay, I shouldn't be here?
I mentioned the last couple of years, and besides being the HR director, I was more or less the chief ethics officer. So I was asked to do something which I'm always pretty creative. Let's figure out a way to work within the constraints of policy, procedure, guidelines, whatever that may be, to create the win win, get you what you want, and also keeps us kosher, so to speak. In this instance, it was a request that was more or less rammed down my throat. And my response to that after some thoughtful contemplation was, I just can't do it. This is not right for the good of the whole. And there was retaliation that took place. There was a ordinance that was passed by this government agency that I felt was directly targeted towards me. And I had a decision to make. Am I going to abide by what this policy is that's now in place, or am I going to fight it? And I passively fought it. In other words, I didn't do what was expected of me. And I even requested an opportunity to speak to the leader of the organization. Let's talk about it. It was denied. And so it was just a tense period to walk through. But what uh, what I learned later is for that individual, for not only that, but some of the other things that they had done, they ended up getting indicted and convicted on federal bribery charges.
Oh, wow.
I walked off into the sunset eventually, started my coaching business. And although I hated that period of time, it gave me so much perspective. Things that I share with clients now, particularly those who are going through those same challenges and hardships. So even in the worst of experiences, there can be benefit. I'm not saying it's fun or enjoyable, but it is character building. Stick to your values.
No, love that. So, Kirk, unfortunately, this is a repeating story on this show where, corporate kind of sucks to the point where people leave. What values do you help people develop now as a coach? From your learned experience, what do you try to, with 35 years, again, this past thing, the 2 years of hell, what do you coach people today with your coaching program?
We start with what are your own personal values
Mm.
and
What's an example?
taking that into business. Um, Life always intersects that.
Mm.
So it's going to be, first of all, building positive relationships, but that will transcend beyond the work environment to family, friends, people that we associate with through our vendors who maybe supply us with the kinds of things that we need in order to do business. So, building relationships will often be where we start. Spirituality will often enter into it. My spiritual beliefs are such that this is how I go about doing work. So we'll examine that. Are you taking care of yourself? Is there a healthy mind body connection? Are you exercising? Are you eating well? We'll talk about giving yourself the gift of time away from work. The job may go away someday, and it may happen voluntarily or involuntarily, but are you bigger than this job that you do daily? Um, is there time for recreation that goes with your work? Do you utilize your vacation? Finally, finances can also enter into it. Um, is there something that needs to be done to make that better, make that stronger, that may not necessarily require or include, I'm going to get more money or I'm going to seek a job making more money? Because if your financial habits are the same, that's really not going to correct anything. It's just going to layer on more stuff. So we'll focus on all those things often besides relationships at work, finding a new job, communicating better with others, etc.
No, that's excellent, Kirk. So one of the things that's interesting, if you look up the word value, right, there's two sort of meanings, and you kind of touched on both. The first is, well, the second meaning of the word is what something is worth, what most people think in terms of dollar value, right? But I love how you talked about kind of the standards for which we're to live our life, right? So when we start to incorporate this, what I call number one meaning of value, how do we measure that, right? Because it's a little different than saying I've got X amount in my bank account. How do we measure positive relationships, spirituality, things like that, taking care of yourself? What's the feedback?
Good question, Tony. So we look for KPIs in
I
so
love
many
it.
different
True
things.
HR, I love it.
That's right. How do we measure that? I think a lot of it, and I coach people on this, will often start with what's your story? Because we gravitate towards stories we're read to as infants by our parents. It'll start us with Goodnight Moon or whatever the story may be. But what is your story of achievement? And there can be some measurements of I've saved this amount of money or I have made this amount of money for this company. I've created greater efficiencies. But particularly from an HR person standpoint, my measurement comes from applause. Um, I one of the things I value most is I had a situation where a person I had mentored came into my office and he said, I'm fixing to have a second child. My girlfriend and I have already had one. And something you said to me about marriage struck that that was going to be a good environment for me to raise children in. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. Tony, the interesting thing about that, I have no recollection of that conversation ever taking place, but it was a certain maybe indefinable something about the values that permeated from me that were probably never spoken. How I conducted myself. People look to you and they'll seek to mimic the traits that are particularly appealing to them. It may have been a process of osmosis, but Tony, for me, him saying that and him repeating that years later after I'd left that work environment was one of the biggest measurements and boost I've gotten in my career. And it taught me you don't always have to be talking. You need to be listening, watching, observing in order to have impact. I would watch people in meetings, and the most influential folks often were the ones that in a 60-minute meeting would not say anything for 55 minutes. But at minute 57, they would have a 90-second comment, and it shifted the whole dynamics of the meeting and left people thinking about what that person had said, impactful. And so I coach that, I strive to fulfill that.
So, Kirk, what do you think the workplace culture needs more of today? Is it that kind of active listening that you were talking about? The person who sits there for 55 minutes and says the right thing at the right time? I mean, I just really want to like tap into your, vast experience of being in HR, which I believe is a very critical department in any sort of business. What does the workplace culture need today that you see missing?
Number 1, active listening. We talked about that. But to go with that active listening is this thing called ego, which we all have. And we associate ego with being, I can jump farther, I can talk louder, I can be more articulate. And all those things are important. We love a gifted orator, but communications is two ears and one mouth. And so, how do we strive towards allowing the other person to speak more and being curious about that? In other words, somebody comes in and talks to me about something. That's interesting. You should bring that up. Tell me more. What's the story? And oftentimes we'll through inquisitiveness, get to the root of the issue, which has very little to do with what they came in to talk to you about or talk to me about when I was HR to begin with. But again, the benefit from that was always, I feel better. Thank you for listening to me. I had to get that out. And oftentimes that's really the solution.
No, I love that. So I want to go down the ego path, Kirk, with you and look at it through the perspective of the younger generations coming in, right? So I'm a millennial, right? So I've got all the sort of stereotypes labeled with me as a millennial. What are your thoughts with ego and the younger generations in the workplace today?
Well, my kids are millennials, so I get to observe it firsthand from what their experiences are and the experiences of their significant others. The technology that we have at our disposal is wonderful, but if we notice something about it, it's always seems to be who can, speak a little bit louder, who can speak longer, who can really arouse an emotion and get us to thinking about it. But and so I see a lot of that being followed with particularly my kids,
Mm,
their generation, that sort of thing. More reliance on that because it's not exciting to watch somebody listen. What is exciting is the listener host another person and they build that individual up. So let's all be builders of who that other person is and encouragers. You have listened well to me talking today as an example
mm.
and have
Thank
gotten
you.
me to talking. I feel better as a result of sharing some of these things with you, Tony. That's an effective approach and something with your peers that is ripe for being mimicked, in my opinion.
One of the frustrating things, Kirk, I've worked at small and large companies. When companies start treating you as the employee number and not saying your name, it just gets cold, right? So it's like just trying to bridge that, again, human relation. I think businesses forget that they're people at the end of the day, right? People want to be heard, like you said. So, no, that's beautiful. So, I want to pivot, Kirk, because I'm just like really interested about your ESPN background. I mean, that is just like, you got to talk about that. I mean, that's super cool. I love sports. So just you dive right in, how you got into it. That's so cool.
In college, I had a roommate who was a, broadcast communications major, and there was a fellow that was across the hallway who also had a lot of interest in sports. There was another person, in another block of the building who was was a growing writer. He wanted to be a sports writer. So we were the guys. This is pre-cable TV, but would sit around, watch the NBC game of the week, baseball, let's say, for instance, but it could be any sport. And we would listen to the commentary that was conducted. And I've got a very mathematical mind. So I would give a statistic and I would say, okay, 7 of 18 right now. That's 389. He gets a hit here. He's gonna go to 421. He doesn't get a hit, he's gonna drop down to 368. I was just doing these calculations in my head, and that's another story. The others would do the commentary. So, the, fella I was rooming with when the Dallas Mavericks got their expansion franchise in 1981, he became their radio, play-by-play announcer. What a gift he got at a very young age. He made a connection for our buddy across the hallway with the Dallas Cowboys. That friend of mine is now in his 42nd season of being the statistician for Dallas Cowboys radio broadcast. The fellow that was down the hall just recently retired. He was the beat writer for the Dallas Cowboys for the Dallas Morning News. As for myself, when my friend, moved back to the area that I was residing in at the time, he asked me, "Would you have interest in, being my statistician for television broadcast?" I embarked upon that. That was in 1989. He's since gone on to other things. I've continued to do that. I'm in my 37th season, and, earlier today, I was prepping for college basketball tomorrow night in Tallahassee with Florida State. So, it's something I just love. The access to sports is amazing. The stories that you learn of that you don't read about even online are even more worth the price of admission. And Tony, I get paid to do this.
Mm.
I love it.
So I have to ask because I went to UConn, Kirk, and you follow basketball. I guess, of course, I'm a Husky. Who's your college team?
Um, I guess you could arguably say FSU since that's in my territory of where I live now, but an interesting story about the Huskies, a fellow that I work with periodically by the name of Jeff Calhoun,
Yeah.
his dad used to coach,
Yep. Oh, Jimmy
and
C. I love it. Yeah.
he did quite well. So,
Yes, he did. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yes, he did. He's in the history books for sure.
UConn is an interesting story in and of itself, and its influence on ESPN. So ESPN starts in 1979, but
Oh,
there were a
wow.
couple of guys that were huge Husky fans. All they wanted to do was watch their Huskies home and away games, but somebody said, there's satellite technology now. You could watch more than that. We're just interested in UConn. Well, long story short, they got the fever. The Entertainment Sports Broadcasting Network, programming network was birthed. These guys, probably about 14, 15 years after that, they lived in Bristol, Connecticut. They sold to ABC. They did quite well and still do quite well.
I love that, Kirk. What's your sports have great stories, right? For inspiration, a lot of parallels, analogies you can draw to the work world. What is your most inspiring kind of sports story that you've learned a lot from?
Oh, I could write chapters, about that, and have referred to some of them in my book. Recency, there's some value to that. So, we were in State College in November, and Penn State was hosting Indiana, and we know that story. Penn State had not had a good season up to that point. They'd been very disappointing. They had fired their coach. And so the Hoosiers came to town expected to roll over Penn State. Penn State is leading that game late. Uh, Mendoza completes a tiptoe pass with both feet in, which only had to have one in, into the end zone to win the game. It was like 27-24. But when he completed that pass, Tony, we all commented to each other, "That's a Heisman moment," and it was. And on highlight films, you'll look back at it, it's the closest game they had all season other than, the Ohio State, game in the Big, Ten championship, but that one right there is what really made his mark, and sure enough, they go on to great things and win a national championship for the losingest program in NCAA history.
I love that. I love that. Thanks for sharing that. So, sports, athletes have coaches, right? Athletes want to get better. So, when you talk about your coaching program, Kirk, you talked about confidence. What are the things that you're working on? Walk us through your coaching program for the listeners, what you're trying to get them better at, if you will.
Yeah. Well, we make an assessment, first of all. Where are you now? What are you doing? And I'll look at things and I'll ask a lot of curious, related type questions. But let's parallel it to sports. I want to increase my strength. I want to increase my speed on the 40. I want to increase flexibility. For a coaching client in the business world, uh, how do I brand myself more effectively? How do I segregate myself from others through differentiation, through uniqueness? What's a talent that's maybe going to pop that has not been shown up to this point in time? How do I articulate better? So there's a lot of vocal and executive presence coaching that'll often go into that. And what I find more often than not, I'm slowing the pace down, teaching or educating the client on how to take control of a situation without being controlling. And there's a difference, and often it's on cadence, rhythm. I'll give homework assignments. I'm giving some secrets away, but I'll say, go watch the King's speech uh, and watch how his coach worked with King George as a stutterer to slow him down, to give him some exercises. And for that rhythm, go watch Aquila and the Bee, which is a young girl in the spelling bee with Lawrence Fishburne. She visualized herself jumping rope as she would spell CAT. So using techniques, and again, witnessing those aha breakthrough moments where somebody will remark, I've never thought of it that way before. That's like a new grip on the golf club to eventually get your score down.
No, I love that. So, if listeners want to learn these techniques to grow, develop, and articulate their talents, where's a good place for them to land, Kirk?
I am online, various means of social media, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, but I've got a website also, theseedsowercoach.com. And also, I've got another website, kirkmccarleyauthor.com, where you can find my book, Thoughts for My Kids and Other People's Kids, that have some great ideas on success, leadership, communication, and a few sports stories woven in.
Love it. Kirk, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much today.
Tony, my pleasure being with you.
There was a moment in this conversation that stuck with me, and it was when Kirk said when he was asked to do something outside of his values, he stepped out. And that's a growing theme in corporate America today. Leadership can feel cutthroat, the drive to make money can overshadow the people who actually make the company run. And I understand companies need to survive, but when you start cutting out the lives of the very people who sustain it, well, good luck. And we know that success isn't about good luck, it's about good skills. And today's skill is this: grade your values. I love how Kirk graded his nearly 35 years in HR as a B plus, maybe an A minus. That level of honesty is powerful. So ask yourself, how do your values rank with your work today? Do you give it an A? Why? What if you gave it a D? Where are the pain points? And if you're not sure where you stand, head over to the Work Sucks But I Like It website and take the free assessment quiz. See where you're at. It's really about giving yourself a baseline to see where you need to go. Any questions? Reach out to me there or reach out to Kirk for his unique blend of sports and HR and his coaching, which I think is great. Trust yourself, as Kirk would say. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.